Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're logging on from in the world, and welcome to this latest Infrastructure Intelligence in the Spotlight interview. And I'm really excited that today we have with us the President and CEO of the American Council of Engineering Companies, live from Washington, Linda Bauer Darr. Linda, good morning to you, because that's the time it is where you are, and you're very welcome to be with us here today.
Good morning, Andy. Thanks for having me this morning. I'm thrilled to be with you all.
Great. So obviously, one of the key things I'm sure on many people's minds, both in the US and indeed in the UK, is the massive plans for US infrastructure. We've seen recently the passing of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which are promising I was going to say £1 billion worth of expenditure. It's actually £1 trillion worth of expenditure, almost unheard of levels of expenditure on infrastructure, certainly in terms of the UK is concerned. Can you give us an idea of the scale of what's planned and what that's looking like from your perspective?
Yeah, you raise a really good point, Andy. We had been used to talking in billions, and all of a sudden this plan put us in a whole new realm where we're talking in terms of $1 trillion. It's a $1.2 trillion plan, and that really is unheard of. It's long overdue. I've traveled a lot in Europe and I've traveled in the UK, and the US highways were lacking in a lot of ways. That's all, obviously an issue and an embarrassment to a lot of us in the United States. At once, we were kind of leading the way, and we have really fallen behind. So this package is going to make a huge difference. If you look at the situation we were in going into the debates about the plan, we had 1 in 5 miles of highways and major roads that were in very poor condition. So, that's a lot. This is a big country, and that's a lot. 43,500 bridges in poor condition. As a matter of fact, we've had a couple bridge collapses in the last 10 years or so that people thought were going to be the motivation, to finally move forward. But even that did not push this legislation forward. So it's a game changer. $1.2 trillion, $550 billion in new investment, which we're really excited about because that means a lot of design work. And the difference with this bill, too, is that it spans multiple markets. It's not your grandfather's traditional infrastructure bill, right? So it's $35 billion for roads and bridges, $66 billion for rail, $65 billion for broadband investment, and that's new. Our infrastructure bills didn't used to cover that right alongside the surface transportation. $91 billion for public transport, $42 billion for airports and ports, $55 billion for clean water. Again, not usually thought of in the same context as our surface transportation spending, but included in this bill. And then finally, $73 billion for a more resilient energy grid. So, there's a lot of work to be done. The challenge here and everywhere is have enough engineers to do it.
Yeah, we'll come on to the, some of the challenges in a minute, but I just want to pick you up there on the seriousness of the situation, the fact that the infrastructure had actually run down. Why do you think that was? Why did we see successive governments not necessarily identify infrastructure as a key area to develop?
Yeah, I have a personal view on this that I'm not sure is shared across the country, but I've worked in this space for about 30 years, and for a period of time, I was in charge of the budget for the U.S. Department of Transportation, and I saw things come to a screeching halt when bipartisanship took a turn for the worse, if you will, and eventually came to a grinding halt in the last, I'd say 5 or 6 years. But one of the things that allowed us to always kind of grease the wheel, if you will, for infrastructure spending was having lawmakers be able to deliver to their constituents projects at home. Right, that's what builds the buy-in and the constituent support, so that the members of Congress are able to vote in support of the larger package. But we stopped doing what they call earmarks, and in this bill, that shifted. There were some, I think they call them something like, congressionally directed projects or something like that. But they are projects that are specifically targeted to go to specific places and specific constituencies. And I think that, more people were able to buy in. I don't know if that is going to grow. I hope that it does, because I think done well, it allows the people to speak for what projects need to be done. And that's the way our democracy is supposed to be working.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned about you've worked for many years in this space, and obviously before you became the CEO of the ACEC, which for those who are listening and also watching again on our YouTube channel, because we get a lot of people watching these interviews after the fact as well. The ACEC is the kind of equivalent to the UK ACE, Association for Consultancy and Engineering, albeit the ACEC is a much bigger organization, as many organizations are in the US, and we'll come on to that in a minute. But you have extensive experience in the transportation sector, both in terms of leading business associations and also, as you just pointed out, working for the government as well. Our sector is not that well known for women being in leading positions. And I think it's somewhat appropriate that the day after International Women's Day, we're actually talking to a high profile woman, not just in our industry, but on the world stage as well. Do you have any reflections on why you think that might be?
Yeah, that's, well, thank you for noting that. And, my experience started 30 years ago working for the trucking associations, which was not, as you imagine, a female-dominated field. The railroad industry wasn't. The moving and storage industry wasn't. My own experience with this was, I think, more personal. I mean, I became a CEO because my parents were the kind of people that told me I could do anything, and it never occurred to me that I couldn't. And I had a great mentor at the American Trucking Association who also just, he didn't think about whether you were a woman or a man, you were black or you were white, you were old, you were young. He just thought about whether or not you could get the job done. And so I was very fortunate. But I think more recently, we have really opened up an important dialogue about equity. And we talked about diversity in new terms, right? Diversity is not about a quota. Diversity is about opening your minds to new perspectives so that you can lead more effectively. And I talk to other CEOs about this all the time. I feel like, we're so busy and we're pulled in a million different directions, right? In a lot of cases, we're a mile wide and an inch deep. And so, that comes with a lot of risk. So you need to make sure that your inputs are coming from all over the place, right? You can't just have a limited source of inputs or you won't be effective. You need people to cover your blind spots, and diversity allows that. And so I think, especially in the last few years, and frankly, since the Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement preceded that, but, both of them have kind of really gained a lot of speed in the last 4 or 5 years.
Just turning back to the bipartisan infrastructure law, obviously, this massive $1 trillion infrastructure investment program. How did you as an industry engage with politicians on the plans, and also how difficult were the negotiations around some of that process from your perspective?
Well, apparently it was very difficult because we haven't done this in about 20 years. So I think, we're all out of breath after this crazy marathon. Never seen anything like this. I mean, there was so much foot dragging and so much angst for so long. And kind of ironically, it took COVID to kind of wake us up and to propel us forward to get this done. It's never easy when you're looking at legislation of this size. I think the thing that was interesting to so many people this time around was how fast it happened. After 20 years of dragging our feet, all of a sudden the momentum picked up and we saw it moving forward. And it kind of woke us up again to the possibility of this potentially happening. And it was difficult to get all the people on the same page, because this time we were talking about infrastructure in a new way, right? We were talking about some things that in all honesty, are jarring for some people to talk about in a traditional infrastructure dialogue, right? Things like climate change and things like equity, these things are not universally embraced as a topic of public policy. And so you had a lot of people around the table with a lot of different opinions, but ultimately, I think it came across the finish line because of the economy and because it ultimately is always a jobs bill, right? But in addition to that, COVID laid bare a lot of the weaknesses that we have in our infrastructure. COVID also allowed for there to be a lot of people off of our roads and bridges because we were all staying home. And, it seemed like that was a good time to put projects forward, right? Because that's one of the challenges we have in, highly developed countries is that when we're ready to do the projects, we can't get people off the roads to start them because they need to, get to work and get to school and all the things that we do as human beings.
I mean, it's interesting there you mentioned about COVID because clearly that had an effect. And in the UK, we saw our politicians talking about looking at infrastructure and construction, if not as a panacea, certainly as a key driver for the post-COVID economic recovery. And clearly that's one of the things that's coming through with a lot of the statements from the politicians, especially the president himself in America. He talks about economic, sort of recovery, transformation, and all the rest of it. And I'm also really interested in what you said there about the conversations in America at the moment, particularly when you talk about broadband as infrastructure. I sense there's a real opportunity to kind of reframe infrastructure. We would argue, as people who work in this brilliant sector, we would say, well, it covers everything. Infrastructure changes the world. And I sense a real opportunity here to start raising the bar on that one, broadband as infrastructure. Well, if COVID taught us anything, we wouldn't be able to do anything without, decent broadband. So is there an opportunity in your mind for us to reframe that whole debate around what is infrastructure?
Yeah, it's a really good question, a really interesting development. And I think that, at one point in the debate in the U.S., infrastructure was going from, this traditional package of surface transportation, roads, bridges, transit, some rail work. And it's expanded, as we said, to, much broader platform of project work. So at one point, it was going to get even bigger because initially the president's plan included things like, hospital work and schools and daycare centers, data centers, like stuff that is more in the vertical side of the work that we're doing, that our engineers are doing. And certainly during COVID, those were all critical elements of our infrastructure where we saw gaps. But that kind of got some of those areas got pushed out. Mostly the building space got pushed out. And then his plan was to include it in Build Back Better, which is this larger plan that got a lot of pushback. So we ended up with ultimately an expanded view of infrastructure because we do have energy, we have broadband, those kinds of things, but it's not as big as it would have been. So your question is, going forward, will we stay in this space? I think we need to stay in this space. I think it really is a holistic approach to, the backbone, if you will, the framework for our economy and for our lives. And if we neglect that, we feel the consequences, and ultimately we put ourselves at risk. Engineers don't like risk.
What lessons did you learn from this process? I mean, obviously ACEC's got a great reputation on the lobbying front, on engaging with politicians. What lessons did you learn from liaising with politicians and other opinion formers around this issue?
Well, I think that leading ACEC was starting to kind of shift its mindset a little bit. I think that we had been more of a reactive organization. We didn't want bad things to happen to us, to a proactive organization where we want to take our place, and I think the rightful place for engineers in today's world, as a more proactive role. we wanted to frame the engineering space as one of thought leadership, right? It's not just the client says, go and do this, and we figure out a way to get it done. We need to take our collective experience, intelligence, skill set, and put it to work to help create the innovation that's needed to address some of these huge challenges that we're facing. So we talked about engineering in terms of the possible. It's interesting, our colleagues in the professional society that's known well and well respected around this country, the American Society of Civil Engineers, that's about, we're about the business of engineering, they're about individual professionals. They do a report card every year that talks about what's wrong with the infrastructure. We tried to position ourselves to talk about what could be right, what's possible, to put ourselves in a place of opportunity. And one of the things that was critical to us in kind of putting us in that lane was a couple of years we stood up something called the ACEC Research Institute. And basically we wanted to have the ability to put new knowledge out there in the debate and to be able to have kind of a quick response to legislators and policymakers when issues were coming up and we needed to put forth an effective argument based on not just anecdotal information, which we had a lot of, but really based on, hard facts, data, and research. And one of the things that we did in the last couple of years was we put out a study that showed that we were working with Rockport Analytics that showed that the infrastructure bill would create 82,000 new jobs in the A&E world, right? So that's huge. And so often infrastructure is thought of as, jobs work, right? It puts a ton of people into jobs. So I think that this really helped add to the argument about why this was going to be an economic game changer. We looked at, what it put into the economy as well, and it was, significant. It was, I think it was $85 billion, or $75 billion that was added to GDP, and then $62 billion in new wages. Again, this is a time where people were worried about their own, purses and wallets, and we were in a tough position, and we were in an uncertain position. So the idea that, this would deliver in such a big way economically was an important thing for us to be able to support. And so we're doing a lot more in that space. We're excited about that. That could be a whole nother discussion. But again, it's this shift into thought leadership and being proactive and thinking about what's possible versus responding to bad things that seem to be coming our way.
Just on that very point, you mentioned earlier about engineers traditionally being somewhat risk averse. How do we turn that round a little bit in order that, because I hear a lot of people in our sector talk about, well, we don't get the credit for what we do, or our profile's not high enough. And you've just spoken there quite eloquently about the need to actually be positive, but also you have to go on the front foot and speak out. And I can see from some of the stuff that ACEC does that you're never short of actually an opinion or two. How do you persuade people who are maybe can be a little bit risk averse that actually it's okay to put your head above the parapet and to actually talk about these issues?
Well, yeah. I don't think that we are ever going to change the personality, the mindset, the part of the brain that's inhabited by mind, right? That's what we're about. We're about minimizing risk. We're about making sure that people are safe and that bridges don't fall down ultimately. So that's who we are. But we're also much bigger than that because of this cumulative experience that we have as a profession and an industry. And I think what the risk that we're facing across the world is the commoditization of the profession of engineering. And I heard about that from, the day one when I talked to the search committee when, I started this journey with ACEC. And I've studied it a lot. And what I see is that this is a profession that once held very kind of high, had a much higher profile and was held in much higher esteem. But people are being drained out of this part of the business and going into tech and software development, lots of other areas that they think are more sexy. Well, this is becoming endemic for our industry because it has to do with policymakers not paying us for the quality, but paying us instead, based on, what they see as a low cost opportunity for them to get a lot of work, right? It's keeping people from being drawn into our industry because they don't see it as an exciting place to be. So that's a problem. So we're not attracting people to the industry. We're not getting paid what we're worth. We're not being consulted, and we're not invited to tables that we should be at, and frankly, at tables where we should be leading. So I think it's really the number one challenge that we're facing that's tied to our productivity, our profitability, and our ability to continue on as a profession and as an industry with, the kind of talent that's needed to deal with some of these huge complex challenges. So, I think the way that you do that is you remind engineers of why they came in the profession to begin with. They didn't come in the profession to help people mitigate risk. They came because they like to build things. They like to solve problems. They like to create new things. So there's a lot of innovation and entrepreneurial spirit inside the engineering mindset, I think, that in some ways can be stifled by, all of these worries and concerns. And there's an important space for that, but we need to kind of reawaken the passion within the engineers in this space and remind them, and then ultimately have them be the spokespeople for their own profession, right? And one of the things we're going to do at ACEC is we're going to put together something that we're calling the EEA Roadshow. And what that means is we have engineering excellence awards that maybe you've heard of every year, where we celebrate the biggest, most successful, most impactful project design work that our members do throughout the year. And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of supersize some of those projects. We're going to take some of the winners that have done work that is really timely and newsworthy, and we're going to put them in the spotlight. And we're going to travel around the country. We're going to go to those project sites. We're going to bring policymakers. We're going to bring the media. We're going to bring clients. And we're going to talk about the essentiality of engineering, the value of engineering, what was made possible because of this engineering design work. So, COVID has kind of held us back a little bit because we weren't able to, get people to places that we needed to. But this year, you're going to see that. And you're just going to see us doing a lot more work in that space and it's part of our strategic vision to hold up engineering and the essentiality of engineering and talk about the value so that our clients respect us, so that people want to come into our industry and to raise us up again, because this is a new day where our skill set is critically needed. So we can't afford to not have enough engineers at the table.
Yeah, and interesting you talk about that seat at the table, because I've observed that ACEC has been, I think, very successful with its what we would call advocacy over here. If our event sponsor today, BECG, would talk about the importance of industry organizations, making sure that they're seen as the go-to people for government. I know it's a different political system in America, and I think the connections between the politicians and the business sector are maybe a little bit more finely attuned over than they are over here. But why do you think ACEC has been comparatively so successful with its lobbying efforts? Because I've noticed, again, from some of your big events, you get really high-profile speakers who want to talk to ACEC, who want to engage with your members.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think when you want to get something done, you need to measure it. You need to make sure that it is a priority. And I think it's very clear to all of our members, and it's clear to everyone on our team that while everything we're doing is important, advocacy is the reason that we were created to begin with. Advocacy is a number one focus. In my view, advocacy runs throughout the organization, right? So for me, advocacy is not just the traditional government affairs. It is, and I put this formula together about 10 or 15 years ago in my mind when I was interviewing for other trade associations. And Advocacy to me is advocacy, image, and money. So I call it the AIM strategy, right? So advocacy is, the traditional work that you're doing to create influence with people that are decision makers, and you've got to do that right. But you can't do that right if you don't have, if the industry or the profession that you're promoting doesn't have a strong image. So part of what we're doing is, as we just spoke a few minutes ago, is trying to raise up the image of the industry that we are talking to policymakers about. Make sure that that image is solid, because nobody wants to help somebody that is doing bad things or that's not credible. So you need to make sure that your image is solid. And ultimately money. I mean, let's be honest, you need resources to get things done. So on the advocacy front, we have a great team, and we have a great plan. I think our members are very involved. We have 52 member organizations, in addition to ACEC National. And that grassroots is so important to us. When we need to get to a member, if we don't have a relationship with them from our Washington experience, we go straight to the state and we go to the ACEC member organization in that state, and we work with them to create that connection. So that's great. On the image side, we have really invested in strategic communications very strongly in the last going on 4 years now. We have a podcast that has had, 60 or 70,000 downloads at this point. We only started it, about a year and a half ago. We have a new video production studio in the making that we will unveil in our new office space in May. So we're excited about that, doing a lot more video, doing a lot more YouTube. We have a magazine that has received a number of awards, social media, all the social media channels. So, we are really pushing the message of, what we need to get done to promote engineering on the communications side to improve the image. And then finally, money. We have a great PAC, Political Action Committee. We have one of the largest PACs in Washington, D.C. for a trade association. And that's really important. And recently, we actually bought a townhouse just 5 blocks from the U.S. Capitol, where we are hosting fundraisers. It feels some days like, it almost feels like it's an everyday thing. After the bipartisan bill was passed, we brought in 12 or 13 lawmakers. In one event, we had over 100 people at the House to celebrate the Republican members of Congress that crossed the aisle, that went against their leadership to support the infrastructure bill. So, it's both, it's about creating that relationship, keeping it strong, and rewarding them for the good work that they do, because they do a lot of good work. It's lost in the noise, but those are hardworking people over there in that U.S. Capitol.
Just interested in what you were saying there about the scale of your organization. Obviously, it's a state system in America as well. So you've got regional kind of organizations, plus you, if you like, members of ACEC, of which I believe there's over 6,000 in total. It made me think about a wider sort of issue of scale. Obviously, ACEC is part of a global, kind of federation of engineering associations. How do you think that all the different associations can form a more powerful voice by collaborating on key issues like net zero, to put pressure on governments to see that these problems that we all face are not just problems in individual countries, but are global problems as well? Have you got any thoughts on how we can do that better?
Yeah. First of all, I think we have the right leader in place to put us in that direction, and that's Nelson. And I will never say Nelson's last name because I will never say it. Sorry,
that's just for the benefit of our listeners. That's Nelson Ogunshakin, who is the chief executive of FIDIC.
For me, Nelson is kind of like Elvis. He's just got one name, and that suits all.
I've heard him called many things, but never Elvis. But anyway, continue.
Elvis, or otherwise known as Nelson, has got so much. He's an engineer himself, right? He's got so much energy. He's got so much vision. He's got so much just kind of this positivity that I think really is growing throughout the organization because of what he's been able to bring to it. And so he's attracting people to the organization. Honestly, we were kind of sleepy when it came to FIDIC in the past. I don't think that we spent a lot of time thinking about FIDIC and our role in FIDIC. Going forward, and particularly with COVID lifting, we're going to spend a lot more time in that space, and we're excited about that. We have recently agreed to set up office space for FIDIC in our new spaces in Washington, D.C., so that a FIDIC representative can work with the international development banks, a lot of which are our neighbors here in D.C. We also recently stood up with Nelson and our colleagues in Canada and Mexico, a North American regional chapter of FIDIC. And so we're working together in North America to try to, collaborate on some of these messages. But for me, I think there's a lot of work to be done together internationally around the planet to address this issue of the commoditization of engineering. And I think the most important thing we can do is promote engineers and lift up the reputation of this profession, and then everything else flows from there. So that's what I'm going to be talking about around those tables.
So basically what you're saying then is that, notwithstanding the fact that you're a massive organization, America's obviously a very large place, the international scene is still very much on your agenda and important to ACEC.
Absolutely. There's some, listen, I started my career, my first job in this space, I was in charge of international affairs for the American Trucking Association during the time, and I'm dating myself, but as the European communities was coming together in 1992, as the North American Free Trade Agreement, which goes by another name now, was being negotiated. So it was very clear to me that there was a lot to learn from our transportation and infrastructure colleagues around the world. And I've tried to carry that with me everywhere I go. Coming into this space, there's been a lot of disruption over the last few years. I can't say that every priority that I had coming in has received equal attention. I'm hoping that things are going to calm down a little bit now, and that, our work with the international community is going to be something that will spotlight in the years ahead. And that's my hope, and that's a commitment that I'm making to my members in the FIDIC.
One of the things that we hear about in the UK is, and one of the reasons behind this interview as well, was, obviously there's a massive amount of work going to be done in the US around this infrastructure program. We already know that there are many firms, particularly multinational firms in the UK, who have a footprint in America, who are working in America. Do you think there is any scope for, and I gather that obviously your prime interest is your own members, but is there any scope for potential collaborations between, ACE in the UK, ACEC in terms of knowledge sharing on potential work opportunities over there?
Absolutely. I think the first thing that needs to happen, the discussion needs to be open, right? We need to sit around the table and realize, and this has become an overused expression, but we have more in common than we do in terms of differences. But it is really very true. I mean, at the end of the day, we're humans all dealing with many of the same issues around the world. So I think the first thing we need to do is really kind of improve those relationships and sit around the table together and talk about what's going on in our respective environments. And when we do that, then we start to spark ideas that create these avenues for collaboration. I sat in, for example, in a FIDIC conference, and I was listening to the discussion about digital twins. And I came back and I talked to some of the people on my team, and digital twins had not been a really large concept in the United States when I came on board. And I'm hearing more about it now. And, it's just increasing as this kind of digital connectedness has become, front of mind for the infrastructure bill as well, right? Because we've got to make sure that our infrastructure projects are sustainable and that we're saving costs and we're thinking about things in the long view, and that kind of digital mapping, if you will, of some of these large projects is going to help us do that. But it's ideas like that we bring back and we realize, we need to focus a little bit more on this. Now in the United States, a lot of the conversation is about people staying at their desks, and because we're going to come back, ACEC, we haven't been in the office. We've been doing all this remotely. We haven't been in the office for a couple of years now. We're coming back in April. And so much of that focus is about what's the new work world going to be like. And I think we can all share information about that as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that about coming back to the office and being at your desk. I wanted to ask you in particular, I mean, obviously the pandemic has changed everything around the world, not just in our sector. What do you think, how do you think what will be the longer lasting effects on our industry and maybe work patterns going forward as a result of the pandemic? And how can we actually make a better industry as a result of that if we try and accentuate on the positive stuff and let's not look at the problems?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I tend to be a glass full than a glass half empty person. And I try to see the silver lining, to use a few metaphors there, in every. And for me, the silver lining of the pandemic is it really accelerated this work-life flexibility that so many that are coming into the profession need and want and expect. And as someone who was a working mother, I mean, that was very important to me as my kids were coming up as well. And now we've proven that we can do that, right? And it's so funny. I'm just talking to my own team because at first we were so worried about being apart from one another, and I could feel the angst, and we did as much as we could to keep our culture strong. But as time went on, we started to transition in our own minds about, I worked from home. I work at home. This is where my desk is. This is where I produce things. And as we go back into the office space, it's going to be a whole different mindset, and it's going to be a new way of doing things. We're not going to go in, 5 days a week, eight hours a day. We're going to be in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Our core hours are going to be 10 to 3, and that's going to allow our folks to be able to live the kinds of lives that they've started to develop during COVID that allowed them more time with their children, more time with, their elder parents, more time with their spouses and partners. And so I think that because of that acceleration, we will, and because you can do it as an engineering firm, right? Not every company can allow their folks to work remotely. So this is an opportunity for us. This is a way for us to attract new people in the industry because we've done this so well. We haven't missed a beat. I believe in the in-office, culture that is, so strong because we're, working in that same physical space. It doesn't have to be. And then if we really embrace the concept of equity, also critically important to the next generation, or to the, frankly, the generation that's starting to outnumber the baby boomers, right? So I'm excited about that. I think it's an opportunity for our profession and for our industry.
I'm really, really glad you spoke about that because I'm a firm believer that, we need to use some of what's happened, the terrible time that everybody's been through, to actually come out on the other side in a bit of more of a positive frame of mind. And I think there's definitely something about us presenting ourselves as a modern industry, as one that can actually facilitate a better home life, home life balance as well. And I think, you said you threw a few cliches in earlier. What used to be a cliche was digital collaboration is the music of the future. Well, it's actually clearly the music of the present, or even the immediate past now as a result of what we've seen. We've nearly run out of time. This interview has flown by, as I knew it would be. I'm going to ask you a few quick fire questions to finish with. Firstly, I always ask this one to everybody.
My favorite color is green. My cat's name is.
No. A bit more hard-hitting.
Hard-hitting, okay.
Engineering or construction project. I know that's a tough one when you represent loads of different firms, but do you have one? Favorite engineering construction project? Could be a past one, could be, even a current one.
That's so hard. And, I'll talk about one that is a staff favorite. And there was a project where onion skins were turned into energy in this facility. And head of advocacy, Steve Hall, still talks about that. But, that just shows the resourcefulness and, obviously with, our environmental concerns, I think that was a good one. But my gosh, some of them are about just delivering something that's so critically important and has to do with, challenges to society. But some of them are just so freaking beautiful. I mean, you look at all the work that was done in Hudson Yards in New York, and so many of our members were involved in that project. Really miraculous accomplishments and just inspirational design work done in those beautiful facilities.
And another one, what's the best thing, in your opinion, about your job?
I'm hoping that this is my last job until I retire. And I wouldn't have said that with any of the jobs that I had before. And the reason I say that is because I really enjoy working with these people. The thing about engineers that's so different, the other groups that I've worked with, is that they are serious about collaborating. They are serious about problem solving. They don't run screaming from the room with their hair on fire, or, walk out huffing a massive ego when there's a problem. They only improve when there's problems, right? They get smarter, they get stronger, they get more determined. They dig in because they need to find the solution. And that's exactly what this country needs right now. So I feel like I'm the best place that I could be. And I'm really excited to be here and hope that they'll continue to have me.
Just finishing, hopefully again, and I'm sure given the tenure of your comments so far, it will be a positive message. You mentioned earlier about, our sector has challenges in terms of attracting the young talent in particular for the future. We need the bodies, if you like, to do the engineering. How can we make our industry more attractive going forward so that people look at it and think, I've got to be working in that sector?
So, I have 3 kids, right? And I've tried to raise my kids the same way that my parents did me, to make them feel that they can do anything as long as they put their minds to it, And for me, I think that is a message that we need to send to young engineers coming into this profession, that together, we can create these solutions that are going to leave a mark on this world, leave a mark on this planet, leave a mark on, our peers, our colleagues, and the next generation. So I think it's really important to share that. And in order for them to feel like they're part of that end product, you need to listen to them, right? And it's, again, the same with my kids. They're happiest when I listen to them. Talk less, listen more, bring them to the table, and have them part of the dialogue, not only because it makes them feel valued, but because you're going to be smarter when you do.
Linda Bauer Darr, President and CEO of the American Council of Engineering Companies, live from Washington. I can't believe how quickly this 45 minutes has gone by, but it has. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your enthusiasm. Above all, thank you for your optimism about our industry and the world in which we live in. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and I hope to be talking to you in the not too distant future again. Thank you very, very much indeed for your time here today. And just a quick remark.
Andy, and I can't wait to have you in DC. So.
And I can't wait to go there either. And just to remind our listeners and watchers that our next webinar is on the 25th of March, where we're having a discussion on placemaking and regional development, which is a big issue over here, the whole levelling up agenda. So do join us at 11 o'clock on that day for our latest event, organised in association with BECG. Thanks to everyone for watching, for listening, and thanks again to you, Linda. Good morning to you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you too. Good afternoon, Andy. Thank you.